The portrait arrived wrapped in brittle brown paper, its corners chipped and its glass freckled with age. It was dated 1898, taken in a rural settlement long since swallowed by forest and forgotten by maps. At first glance, it looked like any other family photograph from the era: a stern father, a mother stiff with poise, and their 3 children arranged neatly at the front, each wearing the expression of forced stillness common to long exposure photography. Yet there was something about the mother that tugged at the edges of my attention, something that felt out of place, even before I knew why. Her posture was perfectly straight, her eyes steady, but her left hand was gloved in a way that didn't match the rest of her attire. The glove was thick, dark, and oddly shaped, as if her hand wasn't resting naturally inside it but curled around something heavy, something she didn't want anyone to see. I leaned closer. The glove bulged near the palm, pressing outward in a way that made the fabric strain. The more I stared, the more uneasy I grew, a slow warmth rising in my chest like the onset of fever. The woods behind the family were captured in the background, dense, shadowed, and strangely blurred, as if the trees themselves had been moving during the photograph. The children's eyes seemed to be glancing toward the tree line rather than at the camera, and the youngest child, a boy no older than 5, looked as though he was trying not to cry. But it was the mother who held the center of the frame, her gloved hand resting rigidly on her lap, fingers clenched around whatever secret she refused to let go. I didn't know then that the photographer who took this very image vanished only days later. I didn't know that the settlement behind them would evacuate within the year. I didn't know that the woods in the background were rumored to hold something older than the town itself. All I knew was that the longer I looked at that glove, the more I felt I was not observing a photograph, but being drawn into an unfinished story, one the family had never lived long enough to tell. And it all began with the mother's gloved hand, holding tight to something the forest wanted back. In the faded 1898 portrait, the mother's gloved hand becomes the first unsettling detail that nudges the story away from a simple family photograph and into something far more disturbing. At first, the glove appears like an ordinary accessory worn for modesty or fashion, but a closer look reveals that it doesn't sit naturally on her hand. The fabric isn't relaxed against her fingers, instead, it strains outward, bulging at odd angles as though the shape beneath it is resisting the confinement. Her wrist is tense, almost rigid, as if she is holding the glove in place with deliberate force, keeping whatever is concealed inside from shifting into view. The stiffness in her posture hints that the glove is not merely worn but guarded, as though it is the true subject of the portrait, and she is silently daring anyone to notice it. The children's positions further amplify the unease, because their eyes seem to flick toward the glove as much as toward the camera. Even the husband, though posed in the typical stern fashion of the time, appears to angle his body slightly away from her left side. It is subtle, nearly imperceptible, but enough to suggest that the glove holds a significance the rest of the family is aware of, even fearful of. The mother's face betrays no anxiety, yet her expression is oddly fixed, as though she is concentrating more on hiding what she carries than on maintaining composure for the photograph. The lighting of the portrait, dull and softened by age, cannot conceal the unnatural swelling around the glove's palm area, making it seem almost alive beneath the fabric. The photographer's notes later suggest that something about the glove unsettled him even at the time of the sitting. He wrote that the mother kept her left hand positioned carefully out of the full light, turning slightly away from the window so the glove would remain in shadow. The exposure process, slow and demanding stillness, only heightened her tension, and more than once she tightened her grip, causing a faint distortion in the glove that he initially dismissed as the fabric bunching. But during the final moments of the exposure, he swore he saw the glove twitch, not in the way a tired hand might move, but with a brief, unnatural jerk from within, as though something small shifted restlessly inside it. He told no one, fearing he was imagining things, and pressed on with developing the image. When the portrait dried and the details became clearer, he noticed the outline near the mother's palm, a shape too rounded, too segmented, too foreign to be part of a human hand. It was then he realized the glove was not meant to hide her skin but to imprison something she refused to reveal. The photographer's diary becomes the second major turning point, pulling the story further from the realm of eerie coincidence into something deliberate and ominous. The diary, discovered decades later in a collapsed storage trunk behind the abandoned studio, is worn and brittle, its pages curled and spotted with moisture. Yet the ink remains sharp enough to reveal the growing dread of the men who captured the 1898 portrait. His early entries are ordinary notes on clients, lighting conditions, and the technical frustrations of long-exposure photography, but as soon as he mentions the family, his tone shifts noticeably. He refers to them not by name but as the ones with the gloved woman, as though the mother's presence alone had eclipsed the rest of the family in his memory. He describes the discomfort he felt during their session, noting that the mother seemed preoccupied with her left hand, refusing to remove the glove even when he gently suggested it might create a distracting shadow. The diary entries grow more frantic after the day the portrait was taken. He writes that he could not sleep, that he kept imagining the outline inside the mother's glove, convinced he had seen movement that could not be explained by the trick of light or the strain of long stillness. 2 nights later, he claims he heard something scratching along the floorboards of his studio just before dawn, a faint, restless scraping that seemed to originate from the darkroom where the portrait was drying. When he finally gained the courage to enter, nothing was there, but the photograph had fallen face down, as if knocked by an unseen hand. He became certain that whatever the mother carried inside her glove had imprinted more than just an image onto the glass plate. The entries that follow become increasingly unhinged. He writes that he saw the woman again, not in person, but reflected faintly in the studio mirror, standing near the corner where the chemicals were stored. He insists that she was wearing the same glove, and that her left hand was twitching inside it as though something beneath the fabric was struggling to push free. He boarded up the mirror the next morning, but even then he felt her presence lingering, as if the portrait had opened some invisible door that was now stuck ajar. He writes of dreams in which the mother walked into the woods behind her home, holding her gloved hand outstretched as if offering it to the trees. The final entry, dated just 3 days after the photograph was taken, speaks of a plan to leave town before the thing in the glove finds him. The diary ends abruptly, the rest of the pages left blank, and no records ever mention the photographer again. Local records surrounding the family introduce the third major turning point, revealing that the portrait was taken only days before the community was shaken by a disappearance no one could adequately explain. According to the Brittle Township documents and a handful of surviving witness statements, the youngest child in the photograph, a boy of about 5, vanished without warning one fog-laden evening. The family lived near the edge of the woods, and although the settlement was small and tightly knit, no one saw him wander off, no search party found tracks, and no sound was heard during the hours he went missing. The only testimony that stands out comes from a neighbor who insisted she heard a peculiar rhythm of knocks against the trees shortly after dusk, as though something small was tapping its way steadily deeper into the forest. The townsfolk dismissed her claim as nerves, but she later swore the knocking had the same syncopated cadence she'd heard the boy make when he played with sticks around the home. The most unsettling detail in the records was the mother's reaction. While the father collapsed with grief and begged for help from every able-bodied man in the town, the mother became strangely calm, refusing to join the search and instead standing at the tree-lean with her gloved hand held tightly against her chest. Witnesses described her as detached, whispering something too low to understand, her gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the first row of pines. She insisted to those who confronted her that her son was not taken by any human or animal but returned to what calls to him, a statement that confused and alarmed those who heard it. One midwife who had known the family for years claimed the mother spoke with a tone that suggested she had been expecting this moment, as though the disappearance was not a tragedy but a completion of something long in motion. More troubling was the mother's refusal to allow anyone to touch or even examine the glove during the days following her son's disappearance. Several women from the settlement recounted that when they tried to comfort her, she would step back sharply, shielding her left hand behind her skirt as if the glove were something fragile or volatile. Rumors spread quickly, whispering that she had been acting strangely even before the portrait was taken, wandering into the woods at dawn with her gloved hand stretched outward, performing some kind of ritual no one had the courage to question. The father, meanwhile, became increasingly desperate, insisting that his wife knew more than she was saying. Some claimed to have heard their arguments through the thin walls of their home, the father demanding answers and the mother replying only with the same chilling phrase, "He belongs where he came from." The official record concludes with the family's sudden departure from the settlement just a week after the boy vanished. They left without farewells, without explanations, and without taking most of their possessions. But the glove, witnesses remembered, remained securely on the mother's hand, clenched tighter than ever, as though it held the last connection to the child who had walked into the woods and never returned. The discovery of the unmarked cabin deep in the woods marks the fourth crucial turning point, revealing that the family's connection to the forest was not merely circumstantial but deliberate and rooted in something far older than the settlement itself. The narrator's search, driven by the clues in the photographer's diary and the unsettling details surrounding the child's disappearance, eventually leads to a nearly invisible path winding between towering trees twisted with age. The deeper the trail goes, the more the air grows still, as if even the wind refuses to trespass. It is here, hidden beneath layers of moss and shadow, that the cabin appears, an isolated structure built from dark timber, sunken slightly into the forest floor as though the earth has been slowly reclaiming it. There are no markings, no signs of habitation, and no windows, only a lopsided door held shut by a rusted iron latch. Inside, the air hangs stagnant, thick with the scent of mildew and something metallic, something reminiscent of old blood. Light filters weakly through the cracks in the roof, illuminating the disturbing arrangement on the walls. Dozens of gloves, large, small, worn, stiff, are hung on nails like artifacts in a macabre collection. Some are neatly placed, while others are twisted or collapsed inward, as though whatever once filled them had shriveled or slipped out. A few contain faint scratch marks inside the lining, thin like the drag of fingernails or claws against fabric. The narrator counts 3 that resemble the glove worn by the mother in the 1898 portrait, all of them heavy-looking, their palms bulging subtly outward. The discovery raises immediate questions. Why would anyone collect gloves, and why do so many show signs of something having struggled inside them? On a small table against the far corner of the cabin rests a wooden box, its lid carved with crude etchings, perhaps symbols or attempts at containment. Inside the box is a set of tattered papers bearing fragmented notes, none signed but all written in the same trembling hand. The notes speak of keeping them quiet, of returning what the earth remembers, and of the forest's claim upon the firstborn. One page, water-stained and nearly unreadable, mentions a ritual that must be performed when the hand begins to change, an unsettling phrase that makes sense only in connection to the bulging shape within the mother's glove. The narrator begins to understand that the glove was not intended to hide a deformity but to restrain something with purpose, something that had been passed down or awakened within the family. The cabin's silence grows oppressive, broken only by the occasional distant knock echoing faintly from the forest, rhythmic and deliberate. The gloves on the wall seem to tilt slightly in the dim light, as if responding to the sound. The narrator leaves the cabin with the chilling realization that the mother was not the first to carry something in her glove, nor the last to walk into the woods seeking to keep an ancient pact from unraveling. The return of the shape at the tree lean becomes the 5th and most immediate threat, pulling the narrator from research and speculation into a chilling confrontation with something that has been waiting in the woods far longer than any human record. It begins subtly, with a sensation of being watched whenever the narrator approaches the forest's edge. At first it feels like a trick of exhaustion, the product of too many days spent reading brittle documents and nights spent imagining the restless scratching described in the photographer's diary. But the feeling does not fade. Instead, it sharpens, becoming a weight that settles between the shoulder blades, a steady prickle along the spine that prompts the narrator to turn around again and again despite the empty clearing behind them. Even animals seem to avoid the tree lean, birds fall silent, and small creatures scurry in tense, erratic movements as though aware that the forest hides a presence they dare not acknowledge. The first clear sighting occurs at dusk, when the fading light distorts the shapes of the trees into towering silhouettes. As the narrator prepares to leave the site of the abandoned cabin, a movement far down the path catches their eye. At first it resembles a human figure, tall, thin, and slightly hunched, but its proportions are wrong, its posture jerking with each uncertain step, as though its limbs are learning how to move all over again. Its left hand hangs at an unnatural angle, and even from a distance, the narrator can see the unmistakable outline of a long, weathered glove encasing it. The glove is familiar, disturbingly so, bearing the same stitching pattern, the same thick fabric, and the same bulging distortion as the one worn by the mother in the portrait. The sight of it sends a cold ripple through the narrator's body, not only because it implies the glove's survival but because it suggests whatever was inside it is still very much alive. The figure pauses near the first row of trees, its head tilting as if scenting the air. The movement is slow, deliberate, and predatory. The forest behind it seems to press forward, shadows thickening around its form like a veil meant to conceal it until it chooses to reveal itself. When the narrator takes an involuntary step back, the figure responds immediately, its gloved hand lifting slightly, twitching at the fingertips in a way that suggests both invitation and warning. For a brief moment, the last rays of light catch the surface of the glove, and the narrator sees the fabric pulse, as though something beneath it expands and contracts with a quiet, rhythmic hunger. The shape does not advance further that evening, but its presence lingers long after it slips back into the trees. Footprints appear in the dirt the next morning, long, narrow, and unevenly spaced, like the stride of something not entirely accustomed to walking upright. The narrator realizes the forest is no longer hiding its secrets. It is revealing them, one step at a time, and the figure wearing the glove is drawing closer each day. The revelation of what lay inside the mother's glove marks the sixth and most devastating turning point, the moment when all threads of the mystery converge into a truth far more ancient and terrifying than the narrator imagined. The discovery comes not through a single clear event but through a series of small, accumulating signs that begin to strip away the last layer of uncertainty. After encountering the figure wearing the old glove at the tree lean, the narrator resolves to uncover what the mother had tried so desperately to contain. The photographer's diary, the abandoned cabin, and the strange documents within it all hint at a ritualistic purpose, something rooted in bloodline and inheritance. But none explain the nature of the thing itself, the entity so carefully imprisoned within coarse fabric and carried with equal parts fear and duty. The breakthrough comes when the narrator examines one of the gloves found in the cabin, a glove identical to the mother's but smaller, perhaps meant for a child. The inside is lined not with cloth but with hardened, resin-like material that appears grown rather than stitched, forming a kind of natural husk. Embedded within it are faint grooves, spiraling patterns that resemble the segmented structure of an insect's limb, except wrong in proportion and too intricate to belong to any known creature. When the narrator presses gently against the glove's palm, the material responds with a faint elasticity, as though it were once alive and molded to encase something that could expand or shift inside it. The discovery sends a chill through the narrator, confirming the glove was not a garment but a cage, a living sheath meant to suppress movement. The final piece of the truth emerges when the narrator revisits the blurred tree lean in the 1898 portrait. Adjusting the image under magnification reveals faint distortion near the mother's gloved hand, a ripple where the background appears pulled inward, as if the glove were exerting a quiet gravitational pull. The mother had not been shielding a deformity or concealing a weapon. She had been restraining a creature, something small enough to curl into her palm but strong enough to distort its surroundings. The legends referenced in the fragmented notes from the cabin speak of forest spirits that bind themselves to families, requiring hosts at birth and passing from parent to child. Once accepted, the creature grants protection and heightened senses, but only if contained within a binding chamber, an object like the glove. If uncontained, it seeks freedom, reshaping the host's hand, nerves, and eventually the mind itself. This knowledge becomes horrifyingly clear when the narrator hears the same rhythmic knocking described by the neighbor in old records, now echoing from the trees at night. Each knock feels directed at them, as though the creature recognizes a new vessel. The glove from the cabin shifts on its nail, trembling slightly as though responding to a call. The narrator realizes the mother had not been protecting her child from the forest. She had been protecting the forest from what her child might become. And now, with the creature unbound and its former hosts long gone, it has begun searching for someone new to claim.